of the Times-Union and Jacksonville.com's online budget chats. Today we're going to be talking about police spending, and we have Sheriff John Rutherford with us. Police spending is a big issue in Jacksonville. Jacksonville is said to be spending the least in the state on its police compared to residents. We spend $378 a head on police services, and at the same time we're known for having problems with violence, specifically a murder epidemic that the police are starting to get under control this year. Joining us today is Sheriff John Rutherford to talk more about the budget issues surrounding his department. Sheriff, welcome.
Good to be with you, David.
Great. Sheriff, we talk a lot about police spending being the lowest in the state, but we've also talked about how lean of an operation JSO has become just by virtue of needing to trim down, needing to get in line with the city's overall financial needs. Now, I guess the question is, on what side of the tightrope are we leaning here? If we're a lean operation we can pride ourselves in, is it really a bad thing to be spending the least in the state on police?
No, it's not necessarily a bad thing. If we had low crime numbers, I would say that's a good thing. The problem is what that low expenditure on police results in is fewer officers per 1,000 citizens. That's a bad thing. And as a result of that, I can tell you we had the operational audit conducted by the Matrix Group, who said, look, we were, if not the best, the second best agency they had ever conducted an operational audit on, and they've conducted over 200. They said, look, you're efficient, you are effective, you have great community programs, but you lack some resources. And that's where I came up with the 225 officers that we needed, and convinced the council and the mayor's office, who also co-commissioned that study with us. And what they came up with was a multi-year staffing plan where we would hire these officers. And to date now, we've hired 120 new officers. Now, because I made the commitment to the community and the council and the mayor, and I said, look, give us the resources and we can impact on this violent crime. But the three things that we absolutely have to have. Number one was more boots on the street. Number two was massive community support, which we're now receiving. And number three, aggressive prosecution, which, since Angela Corey's been in office, has been a tremendous increase in aggressive prosecution. So those three legs are coming together. And here's the good news, David, and you kind of mentioned it. Overall crime in Jacksonville, year to date, is down 11%. Through the UCR numbers that we just turned in for the first 6 months of this year, crime is down 10%, double digits. That's the single greatest reduction in crime in Jacksonville. Now, they've gone back to 1989 and looked, and we're going back another 10 years to look. I can tell you in over 20 years, that's the largest single year reduction in crime that we've ever experienced. And that is because we are starting to get those resources. What concerns me about this budget year is we don't need to be cutting back and pulling back on those, on that promise to provide this community with the necessary resources to keep it safe. Because if we don't turn this around, what you see in the Blueprint for Prosperity report, where it said from 1990 to 2000, the number of people working in Duval County but now choosing to live outside Duval County went up 45%. People are moving out of Duval County, and they're not moving out for lower taxes. They've already got that. What they're moving out for is quality of life. They don't want they don't want their family members murdered in their homes. They don't want their children dying in carnage on the roadways. They want their children to go to school and learn, not be bullied and beat up. Those are the quality of life things that people want, and they will pay more in taxes to get it. And they're leaving this community to do that. That's our tax base moving out. So the good news is the promise made is a promise kept. We said we would lower crime in this community if they would give us the resources. They've begun to do that, and we have reduced crime in this community in historic levels. Now that story is not getting out much, but I hope that this 6 months trend turns out to be a yearly trend and beyond. But fact of the matter is, I think it's all starting to come together, and I'm concerned that these budget issues are going to impact on that.
And with you saying that this was a 6-month trend, how confident can we be that it is something that can continue, or is it just a blip right now, or is it a product? Is it a product of more policing or aggressive prosecution? It would seem that prosecution in a 6-month trend really wouldn't have much of an impact because the kind of the slow wheels of justice. You're not quite at the courthouse yet.
But David, it's having a huge impact, and here's why. When I go and look at, through our cons meetings that we have every 2 weeks, looking at who's in jail, what are they in jail for, how are they being prosecuted, when I look at that and see close to 300 fewer null process this year compared to last year. Angela has prosecuted 300 cases that would have been thrown out last year. 1,200 cases where individuals have remained in jail up until sentencing, where before they were being put out through plea negotiations mainly. So that's had an impact. Now, our jail count is up about 300, 350, but that's okay because we're much better off to have that criminal element who are habitual criminals, keep them in jail, keep them off the street, keep them from re-victimizing somebody else after they get released, keep them in jail until they're sentenced on their first charge. Don't allow them to have 5, 6, 7, 8 charges before they commit a murder. So it's having a tremendous impact.
Mm-hmm. And we were talking about the null pros cases, and for those of you watching, null pros, it comes from a Latin term which essentially means the prosecution does not want to move forward on a case and it's dropped. Sheriff, is in your opinion, would this reduction in the null process, would this be because of better police work, or would this be because of more aggressive?
I think it's more aggressive prosecution. And in fact, if you look at the number of criminal trials that Angela and her folks have taken into the courtroom, I think that number has tripled. So significant changes in the state attorney's office that are really, I think, in fact, I've been telling people in the community, when you see Angela Corey, you ought to give her a hug and a kiss, because she's responsible for a lot of this drop.
When you're saying that there's a reduction in crime this year, what specifically has been going down? Has it been property crimes, violent crimes? How has this?
Yeah, I've got a list here, and violent crime has gone down year to date 15%. Through June, the numbers that we turned into UCR in the Uniform Crime Report was 13.8% in violent crime. Even property crime. And you hear people saying, well, you know, in this tough economic time, you hear people saying that, you know, property crime is going to go up and crime goes up in general. So we're realizing these reductions, even in the face of that. And property crime is even down 9.3%. But the largest reduction is in violent crime. In fact, it's over 15% year to date. And that's significant. And that's why, you know, you mentioned before, is this just a blip or is it going to continue? It looks like it's going to continue because the July numbers were even better than the June numbers, the 6-month numbers. So it is continuing to go down. And I hope that trend will continue through the end of the year.
And what do you think's behind it? Has Jacksonville just decided to love itself once again, or has it been a police work, or how do you explain a reduction in crime?
Well, I think it is. It goes back to those 3 things that I talked about. We have more police on the street now. We've hired 120 officers in the last 2 years, and we're bringing on more. The city council and the mayor gave us that overtime money to put all those extra officers on the street until we could train these officers up. We're on track to get those 225 officers out there on the street that Matrix reports said we needed. Secondly, that massive community support. I don't think there's ever been more of a focus by the public on crime in their neighborhoods. We're seeing SHADCO membership. When I became sheriff, we had 600 SHADCO members. That's our Sheriff's Advisory Council. We had 600 members. We now have over 2,600 SHADCO members. That's a huge increase. We started the gun bounty program where we asked people to call in, tell us who's carrying those guns illegally. Our tips went up over 200%. the community is really working with us now, and we're fighting back that old don't snitch attitude out there. And I think the gun bounty program has shown that we can be successful in fighting that don't snitch. And so now we have over 220 people who have been arrested because someone in the community called us and told us about a crime where a guy was carrying a gun, or just someone carrying a gun illegally, and we were able to go out and make that arrest and recover their gun. So those two things have happened. We've got more boots on the street, we have more community support, and then third and finally, as we've talked about already, we have tremendous support out of our state attorney's office. And that is sending the message to the criminal element: you're going to be held accountable not the third or fourth or fifth time you get arrested for a felony. You're going to be held accountable the first time.
The community support is an issue I want to get back to in a second, but first I wanted to go to a reader question from Mike, as he's simply identified in the question. It's about the recent good news you got from the federal government, the COPS grant that was able to help you hire 50 new officers. This is money that's going to be paying for salaries for the next 3 years, but then, of course, JSO is going to have to assume that cost. Now,
right.
How are you working that cost into the budget, long-range thinking?
Yeah, well, actually, the equipment cost of the 40 of the, we're going to hire 40 this year and 10 next year. The equipment cost we absorbed. A lot of people don't know this either about the sheriff's budget. We cut $9 million out of our budget already this year, and that covered the increased cost of equipment for those 40 new officers. So we've already absorbed that within our budget. The remaining cost, and I should say the COPS program it goes back like 14 years, and we've received hundreds of officers through the COPS program over the years. The benefit is you get salary and benefits for those officers for 3 years, and then in the fourth year you have to pick them up. Well, those 50 that we received, which was the maximum that any city could get, those 50 were already in our staffing plan, the multi-year staffing plan. They weren't funded in this year's budget because I'm not sure that we would have had the money for them this year. So it was very necessary that we get that grant, and we did.
And these are an extension. This is filling part of the plan that Jacksonville Journey had sketched out, correct?
Well, this is part of the plan that the Matrix audit and myself and the mayor and the city council had sat down and said, we need to hire officers at this rate. And not just police officers, but correctional officers, emergency communications officers, and other civilian positions.
When these 40 new officers you want to hire next year, when will they be on the street, so to speak, after their training and everything?
That class will actually begin October 1st.
Mm-hmm. Have you hired people yet?
No, but they will begin October 1st.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. The hiring process for the police in Jacksonville, can you explain kind of how it goes into the civil service testing and things like that?
Right.
What do people go through to become an officer?
It's well, if anyone is interested in becoming a JSO officer, I would encourage you to go to joinjso.com, and you can get all of the criteria. For police officers, I can tell you we require a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree with 4 years related experience, like firefighting, nursing, military, those kind of things, where it brings a similar skill set. If you think you have a similar skill set and you have 4 years experience, bring that to us, and you may be able to get on with just a 2-year degree. It takes, and then they have to have a polygraph and financial background and personal background. We run a pretty thorough background on our people because, one of the promises I made this community was we were going to be men and women of character, and so we look for that. In addition, once they get hired, like this class that starts in October, and here's why that overtime money was so important. When that class starts October 1st, they will not hit the street for 11 months as solo officers. So I won't get the benefit of those officers until September of 11. So, we're always behind the curve on hiring new positions.
Mm-hmm. When you think about sometimes in businesses, you start thinking about when do I need to build a new building? When do I need to make that capital purchase? And for you, it's sort of the same thing. You have to
Right.
start thinking early about the
Years
needs of
ahead,
officers.
right.
And a COPS program, if I'm not mistaken, had benefited JSO quite a bit in the past.
Yes,
in fact, I think it
absolutely.
was something like 200 officers between 95 and 2004
Correct.
ish.
Yeah.
If I remember right.
Yep.
Now, when was the last time that JSO was able to hire people without that grant program? It was a while back, wasn't it?
For new positions, yes. I mean, we had a handful, 5 or 15 here and there, but nothing of any consequence.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Jacksonville, and that's one of the things that this low funding creates. We had 1.95 officers per 1,000 population until we just hired those 120. We moved up to 1.99, which is good. But to get to the state average of the major counties, which is 2.45, in addition to the 120 we've already hired, I'd have to hire 400 more officers. Well, and that's why I didn't use averages and what other communities have as a reason for my need for numbers for police officers. What we did was we did an operational audit and looked at the DNA of crime in Jacksonville, our department, and what did we need to keep this community safe using nationally recognized matrices.
Now, the 400, is that a low estimate? And my framing for that question is that to get to that 2.45 we're talking about in other cities in Florida, other cities in Florida don't have the geographical challenge that Jacksonville would pose. And I'm thinking about going from downtown to Mayport. These regions are so stretched out that it takes a lot of time to get somewhere. So would it be more to say that we would need more than 400 to try to hit that state average if you're looking at some variables? And things
because what the matrix report did was come in and looked at travel time, distances, all of that was calculated into the need for officers for this community, and that's where the 225 came from. Mm-hmm. And so it's a very fact-based number. It's not just an average, because somebody else has 2.45. I'm not asking for 2.45. If we get all 225, we would go to 2.21, which would just barely move us over St. Petersburg by like 0.07 officers per 1,000.
Yeah, this matrix report is referenced very often over at your office in City Hall. There isn't a whole lot of dispute against it, but what I'm wondering is why then hasn't it not just been the city saying, well, great, we have our solution to the crime problem. We need to hire 225 more officers, find the money. Or is it just not that easy?
Well, it's not that easy because you have to have the whole pie. That's one piece of the three-legged stool. That's the enforcement leg. But you have to have the entire pie. You have to have the prevention, the intervention, and the enforcement. That's why we call it a pie, P-I-E, prevention, intervention, and enforcement. And the enforcement piece is what we looked at with the matrix study. The prevention and the intervention, mainly the prevention side, is the Jacksonville Journey. Those are the programs that are going to long range answer that question that JCCI posed, which was how do you raise young boys and girls to become nonviolent young men and women? And that's the Journey programs. And then the intervention piece is a good aggressive state prosecutor, like Angela Corey. You've got to have that intervention. Going to jail is not the intervention. It's the prosecution that's the intervention. And that's the piece that we were woefully lacking in before.
Mm-hmm. If we're talking about budget needs, I know you've been meeting with people on council to talk about your particular budget circumstance. What is it that you're telling them, and what kind of feedback are you getting?
Well, I'm showing them, excuse me, as you know, the numbers in our budget. The only increase in my budget this year, we cut the $9 million that I told you about. Right. And then the increase in my budget is $18 million, which is the pension increase. And I know I showed you where those numbers were at in the budget. And that's the only increase in our budget this year is that fixed cost of pensions that I don't have any control over.
Mm-hmm. So what is it? What are you hearing back from council on this right now as far as trying to get what you need? to get through the next year.
You know, one of the things that I told them, because I do not want to see layoffs. We cannot. I don't want to put these crime reduction numbers at risk by cutting police officers on the street. That can't happen. We've led the state, either number one or number two, for 17 years as the murder capital of the state. We've got to shed that. We can't afford to be laying people off. Now, what I had agreed to and told them before the vote on the millage rate was, I said, look, if you will pass a 9.5 millage rate, I will support a 2% cut for all JSO and city employees across the board. Because, look, I know cuts alone are not going to fix this problem. Now, you may be able to fix it for this year, but what are you going to do for next year? Because it's going to be even worse next year. Because next year's revenues are going to be based on property valuations this year. And this year, they're down. They're down significantly. So we're kind of in a multi-year fix here, or we should be. And bottom line is, a politician is going to tell you what you want to hear. A statesman will tell you what you need to hear. And what this community needs to hear is we are under-investing in this community. We're under-investing in police. We're under-investing in Parks and Rec. We're under-investing in all of those things that answer the question that JCCI posed: how do you raise young boys and girls to become nonviolent young men and women? And because we're failing in those areas, people are moving out of here. And they're not moving out for lower taxes. They're moving out because we've got the lowest taxes by 20%. 20%. So I supported the 9.5. And I supported the 2% across the board cut if they would vote for the 9.5. They didn't. You know, now we got to fix this thing. And we shouldn't be doing it on the backs of just the police. Look, and a lot of people don't think about this. You know, I hear people say, well, there's people getting laid off all over the community. That's right. And a lot of them are spouses of the men and women who work for the sheriff's office. Just because the police officer's not getting laid off doesn't mean that he's not impacted by this economy as well. They have spouses who are being laid off. They lost money in the market like other people, and so you know, and they're going to catch a double whammy. They're going to get a pay cut and a tax increase. But you know what? We need to fix this thing.
Right. Well, I'm looking at your budget numbers now. It looks like salaries overall as a line item did decrease slightly by about $600,000 going into next year in the proposed budget. Can you explain how that came about? Was that some restructuring or something? Or
well, that probably has the overtime in there as well.
Mm-hmm. The OSS overtime.
Yeah. And and also what happens is the officers who retire are at a higher salary rate than those who are coming on.
Right.
And so that reduction is also captured in there.
Mm-hmm. That reduction is considered a 1/3 of 1% reduction that seems to have just happened organically, mm-hmm. as we're talking about.
Yeah.
You'd mentioned the pension issue, and that's kind of the lightning rod this budget year, although I think mm-hmm. most people agree it's nothing can be done on it to save this year's budget.
Right.
But just in a nutshell, kind of where is your line of thinking on police pension for this year?
Well, as you said, it's got to be addressed. It is a major problem that has to be addressed. But I think we also have to be honest with the community on how we got into this mess. And if you go back and look, what's happened is and this is not just Mayor Payton, it goes back 3 mayors, I think, all the way back to Mayor Ed Austin. We have had ad valorem property tax rollbacks that were funded on the backs of the city pension funds. And I challenge anybody, if you will go to our website at jackssheriff.org, go to our media section there, and look at the roundtable discussion where I think you were there as well.
The one the other day.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And look at that and learn about this pension situation and how we got to where we're at. If you go back and look, for 13 years we've rolled back ad valorem property tax, and the city has used the excess pension reserves to help pay down what they had to pay into the pension. And so they actually paid the pension with the pension. And in fact, they took another $22 million when they chose not to pay any pension contribution for the officers in the drop. So over $300 million has been taken from the pension funds. Now, I also heard, the allegation that, well, that the pension is out of whack and in the financial ditch because the benefits are so rich. In fact, the allegation was made that the benefits are richer than any other pension in the country. Well, if you go back and look at the September 08 comparison that the Times Union did, we're not only do we not have the best pension in the country, we don't even have the best pension in the state. Our pension benefits are very middle of the road. So how did we get here? The fact of the matter is, if it's all about benefits, why is the general employees pension fund in the same financial ditch? Are you telling me they've got the best benefits in the country as well?
And that's what I wanted to ask you about too. Is why do you think police and fire gets? Why is that always the pension fund that comes up as the poster child for what's wrong with pension funding in Jacksonville? What's wrong with the budget? It seems like it's the general employee fund, the correctional officer fund. They don't seem to get brought up as much as your troops.
Right. Well, I think it was a calculated red herring that was thrown out there. They knew they couldn't impact this budget with it, but it took the heat off of the financial situation that the city's in. And fact of the matter is, they brought up something that I encourage people to go and look at. Initially, I didn't know this until I went searching these pension numbers because, as you know, I'm not involved in the pension and the negotiations between the city and the pension board. All I can do is talk about it. I have no vote. I don't control any of that. And in fact of the matter is, when you look and you see that they have funded the ad valorem property tax rollbacks, the millage rate rollbacks, on the backs of the city pensions, and not just the police and fire, but the general employees as well. And the fact that they've taken $300 million out of those accounts is atrocious, or they've allowed the unfunded liability to go up by $300 million.
Mm-hmm. You talk about the ad valorem rollbacks, and I remember looking at the list that was in the JCCI study, and it really seemed like a very nickel and dime kind of operation where you're having 1/10 of a mil, 2/10 of a mil rolled back every year, and you're saying this is kind of what's happened is in this sort of general attitude, this post-consolidation attitude, that taxes are just the demon of this town.
Right.
Do you think that there's a certain part of culture here where you have a lot of, I mean, is it conservative thinking that's been an enemy of the police and fire pension fund?
Well, look, conservative thinking is I want low taxes. Look, I'm a conservative. I'm a Republican. I want low taxes. I don't want no taxes. That's not what I'm asking for, and I don't think that's what conservatives ask for. What they ask for is I want low taxes and I want a good quality of life, because I want my family to be able to live here in peace, my children to be educated in peace. I want them to be able to enjoy a quality of life that quite frankly right now is lacking in Jacksonville. And that's why I think when the mayor says, what kind of city do we want to be? I think that's a valid question. And we should ask, for 17 years, this community has been either number 1 or number 2 in murder. Number 1 or number 2 in per capita murder. My question to the community is, why are we raising more killers than any other community in this state? Why? What are we doing? And more importantly, what are we not doing?
Right.
And that is the things that the journey is now starting to address.
Mm-hmm. What is your best guess on that? Why? What sets Jacksonville apart?
Well, I think we started with a great concept 13 years ago and said, look, we can roll this ad valorem back a little bit. And at some point, it was a good idea. But heck, if rolling taxes back every year is a great idea, let's just go to 0. That'd be the best, right? Mm-hmm. So obviously, there's got to be a balance, and it's got to be balanced against quality of life. And that's why I think what we need is not politicians who are telling the people what they want to hear about, we're going to roll your taxes back, we're going to keep your taxes low. No, what we need to hear is we're going to keep low taxes in this community, but we're going to also have sufficient taxes that we can provide a quality of life that this community deserves.
Yeah, the mayor has gotten a lot of support from the nonprofits, from local business people in his budget proposal, and I'm wondering, from the police end of the budget situation, where is most of your support coming from? Who are your more vocal supporters out there in the community?
Well, I think mainly those people who live in those most affected areas where we've seen a 15% reduction in violent crime. I have people tell me all the time, I used to hear gunshots in my neighborhood all hours of the night. I don't hear that anymore. It used to say in one area out there off of US 1 or New Kings. They're like, it used to sound like Vietnam at night. This guy was from Vietnam, and he said, I don't hear that anymore. Well, something's changing, and these numbers bear that out.
Mm-hmm. And these numbers are, despite the fact the economy, I mean, we've heard the economy being the plague of the budget this year, but at the same time, I thought crime usually rose in a down economy. What do you think
Well, I've heard that, but I'll tell you, David, I'm not sure that that's true. There may be some individual crimes that go up, domestic violence, for example, because you're going to have more fights over money and stress in the family, that kind of thing. But you know what a good man does when he loses a job? He goes and gets another job. He doesn't go out and start stealing and robbing. That's about values. That's not about money. And so I'm not sure that I buy all of that. There's probably some little increase, but I don't think it's as much as most people think.
Mm-hmm. I had a reader question that I wanted to share with you from George Breslin. It's a little lengthy. I'll kind of encapsulate it,
okay.
But he was talking a little bit about efficiencies in the department. He gave a few things that he's witnessed. He said it looked like there was a car accident on 9A. I saw 5 patrol cars for one car that had apparently hit into or some sort of a utility pole. There was a crime scene on Shellcracker Road, maybe 15 patrol cars at the scene. It didn't look like, he said it looked like a number of the officers were sort of on standby, just chatting amongst themselves. And then he's talking about a standoff in North Jacksonville. He said he identified it as one man in his house with a gun, and seeing SWAT teams and so forth. And what he's getting to the point of, if I'm interpreting his question properly, is whether you feel that there is a nature of overstaffing in some of these scenes. If there is, maybe some of them are bulked up to the point that if you pulled back, the resources could be used better.
Oh, actually, I would make the point that, look, at a major crime scene, when you see officers standing around, they are waiting for direction to conduct their canvassing, to ferret out those people who may have seen something. We go and knock on every door for a block around a major crime scene. Those officers are also, if there are officers there who need to respond to something else, they can break loose and go. But you never want to be in a situation where you need them and you don't have them, particularly in a major crime scene. So there is a lot to do with those major crime scenes, particularly a SWAT call out. And yes, it's one person with a gun, but you know what? We've got to do everything we can to get them out of there and get them out of there safely without them harming themselves or others. And that takes manpower.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan, do we have anybody chiming in on that?
Yeah, let me see what we got. We got a few here. Let me see what we got. It's going to take me a second to make sure some of these are valid points.
Okay. While he's looking, let me talk about one other initiative that the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office has, and that's our Police Athletic League. I know it was in the editorial page, and I wrote something about it this week, and there was a really cute editor or
the photograph.
Or the picture by Ed Gamble,
Mm-hmm.
I guess. Look, let me say this about PAL. We serve over 2,800 kids a year at less than $500 a child. We give them educational training, sports training, a real relationship with law enforcement. And the successes speak for themselves. I mean, go to Mallison Park, where we had a a 37% reduction in violent crime after Powell moved in there and took over that park, which the city parks was getting ready to close. We went in there with CSX funding, J.B. Coxwell funding, and we were able to turn that park around and actually reduce violent crime 37% in a 1,000-foot radius of that park. It was a huge success. Powell is the cornerstone of our community policing outreach, and to suggest that these 6 officers should go back and be riding the street and not out there interacting with these youth is just wrong. We've had tremendous success with it. We do not need to be pulling back from Powell. That's another one of those situations where you can be penny wise and pound foolish. In the idea in the editorial cartoon that officers will only volunteer if they're getting paid overtime, I thought that was a little over the top, because I would challenge anybody to look at the giving of Jacksonville Sheriff's officers and employees, and I'll compare that to any organization in this city, Times Union, anybody. Let's look at what these officers give, and the fact that many of these officers are giving their time in sports and athletic associations all over this community every day. So, that I thought was a little over the top and a little unfair to the men and women of the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, who give considerable amounts back to this community.
The sheriff is talking about the Police Athletic League program, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a $2.9 million annual program.
Mm-hmm.
There was an editorial that ran in the Times Union Sunday that suggested it's a great asset to the community, but it could find some efficiencies in it. And do you see extending more volunteerism in the program, building it through volunteers? Or it seems like there would also be a need for community volunteers and people from outside the police department to join in an effort like that.
Well, there are. I mean, there are many people who volunteer with PAL. There are many people who are also paid staff for PAL who are not police officers. We have 6 police, 1 sergeant, and 1 lieutenant who are assigned to PAL. In building those relationships with those kids. The rest are all civilians and volunteers.
What do you? There's also, as we talk more about these Jacksonville Journey sort of philosophies of trying to build a community so that you don't have to arrest people. How does Police Athletic League factor into that? I'm thinking more about this relationship between the community and police officers. Mm-hmm. The idea that they can get along, that it's right. not just right. a uniformed person who's here to harass you and here to take your family away.
Exactly, and David, that's why PAL is so important. We're working with some of the most at-risk kids in this community, and they get to see police officers as people who care about them, people who want the best for them, and they're out there working with them every day. And I tell folks, look. But for PAL, instead of shooting hoops with us, they'd be shooting guns at us. And so those are the kind of things that help raise young boys and girls to become nonviolent young men and women. We shouldn't be pulling away from those things. We should be embracing it. We should be doing more of it, in fact. And I think that's why this community has raised more killers than any other community in this state. Look, these people aren't coming from Mars to kill us. We're raising them right here.
The question of this is also kind of related to the idea of social programming, of non-police initiatives to try to curb crime before it starts. The Sulzbacher Center has been one that's been very outspoken this year about budget cutting could hurt their programs to the point where they're leaving more homeless people out. They're leaving more needy people hungry. They're not able to serve as much food, shelter as many people. Concern of yours as a law enforcement officer in this town?
Yeah, look, those social services, it has to be a balancing act. I don't believe any social service should exist that can't go out and raise funds on their own, because that is proof positive that the community wants that service. Now, I think a percentage of, and I think the percentage that the city uses is 24%. They won't give more than 24% to a nonprofit for their operations, more than 24% of their overall budget. And that may be a very good balance at 24%.
Mm-hmm. And as far as the idea, though, of it being an increase to crime, or a hash mark that would be predecessor to crime, of having more people, the idea being that people are going to get their needs met one way or the other, whether it's getting a free meal at the Sulzbacher Center or stealing food from the Publix down the street. Do you find that to be a real threat?
Yes, I think so. In fact, that's what JCCI pointed to. You have to have these prevention and intervention programs. You have to have that total pie, the whole PIE, prevention, intervention, and enforcement. And that's what a lot of our social service agencies provide. Fact of the matter is, a lot of these homeless folks have mental health issues that aren't being addressed by the social services, and Florida spends the least amount in the country on mental health treatment. It just so happens that DCF District 4, which we're in, also has the least that is spent on mental health. So not only are we the lowest in our state, the lowest in the country, but we have the lowest district in the state that's the lowest in the country. And that impacts on a lot of these folks. And the only way they get out of some of those cycles of mental health and substance abuse is they commit a very serious crime, like a murder or burning a building down or something like that, before they're given the services that they really need.
You bring up a really interesting point too, and I know that in this kind of a budgetary atmosphere, this is something worth talking about. The idea of having a mental health court, or a specific level of the court system for people who suffer from mental health problems. A lot of people will say that that's a layer of bureaucracy that we don't need right now. We can't afford it. But a lot of times, the cost of incarcerating someone is $80 or $90 a day in this county,
right.
And these oftentimes can be a revolving door for 3-4 days at a time of people who aren't really criminals. They're just not there.
Right.
And do you see that? How do you see that in Jacksonville?
Look, I can tell you, David, back when I worked hard to get the habitual misdemeanor offender statute passed statewide, that stopped that revolving door of the mentally ill who were in substance abusers, who were going through the system. And many of them are co-occurring disorders. They have mental health issues and they're self-medicating with cocaine or some other drug. So it's both of those together that you have to deal with. And I think back in 1996, when I started working on that, we had, I think, 4,800, or 4,000, I forget the exact number, over 4,000 people who had been to jail 5 times or more in this community. And they were stuck in that revolving door. And we spent $10.3 million on that population. And so you're right. If you can either treat them properly and prevent the crime, or you can not treat them properly, have the crime, and then treat them anyway.
Right.
So my position is it's pretty wise to do it up front and make that investment in your community. And that's what we're not doing.
And you've seen successes like that in drug court, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Drug court in the Matrix House is one of the best drug treatment programs that in the country, bar none. And I can tell you, those people's lives are being turned around, and people who were stuck in that cycle are and absorbing a lot of resources of this community are now out there with a job, with a family, and guess what? They're paying taxes. Not only are they not absorbing services, they're paying for other people's services.
I had the opportunity about a year ago to go over to the Matrix House and sit in on one of their classes and talk to the people who were trying to learn. At the time, it was remedial math, and just how grateful they were for the opportunity to try and do something that they said they should have done back in high school.
Exactly.
And I think last year the drug court program was if I'm not mistaken, on the chopping block, was it not?
It was. In fact, I've used forfeiture assets couple of different years to continue the residential portion of the drug treatment program, because I believe in it that much. I know from talking to those folks exactly how much it can change their lives and recover their life.
The forfeiture assets is an interesting point. Now, can you explain how that works when drug property is seized, what JSO can do with that, how it can become part of the budget? Because I'm sure there's a manner of thinking out there that why can't you just seize your way out of a budget problem right now? There's got to be enough. There's got to be enough capital in Jacksonville to seize your way out of it. But how does it work when you?
Well, we seize all that we legally can. We're not going to be unfair or do anything outside the law, obviously. But we are probably seizing around 1.2, 1.3 million a year. A lot of which goes to support different programs in the community, particularly those fighting. They all fight crime in some way or another. Like drug court, for example, and giving money to them to help pay for residential treatment beds.
What does drug court cost a year?
I'm not sure what their total cost is. I contributed, I think both years, I want to say it was $100,000, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Now, are you saying the seizures at 1.2 million, is it strictly cash? Is that assets that get auctioned off, or?
A little bit of both. It's a mixture of both.
And the actual drugs that are seized are destroyed and
right.
taken out to the field and burned ceremoniously every once in a while.
So often,
I kind of asked a few of these questions that kind of lead into some reader questions that had come in before we got started this morning. And one from a reader is talking a little bit more from the 30,000 foot looking down angle of the war on drugs. But he brings it home. He's asking a lot about what drug busts in Jacksonville generate, and as we were just talking about the $1.2 million. But what I think it also asks is there a way of quantifying that as a gain, or is there, if you were to look at the resources you put into seizing that $1.2 million, does the cost outweigh the benefit?
Well, yes, because as you know, a lot of people who are involved in drugs are also involved in crime. Sometimes major crimes like robbery and murder. So the more of those drug cartels that we can take down. Look, if you look at the crime numbers here in 04 and 05, the violent crime numbers, in 04, you may remember we started taking down several drug cartels in Jacksonville. And as a result, our violent crimes dropped significantly. And in fact, in 2005, we had 91 murders, down from 104. That was a significant drop, simply because we got all those dopers off the street. And so I know those that talk about, legalizing marijuana and that kind of stuff. Look, there is all kinds of crime wrapped up in that drug use, and the problems that it brings physically to people, I think. So, I'd be opposed to any kind of legalization because of that.
Would you say that when we're talking about drops in violent crime, would you say any of that has to do with any kind of drop in drug use or the drug trade in Jacksonville, or is?
Well, yeah. In fact, I think that 91 in 2005 was a direct result of either 4 or 5, I forget how many it was now, different drug cartels that we took down that year. That was Operation Chopper Stopper, was the big one, if you remember.
I'm talking about the last 6 months, the numbers that we talked about this morning. Does any of that imply that the drug trade is any less vibrant in this town?
Well, we're putting a pretty heavy focus on it, yeah.
I remember we had done a story maybe about 3 years ago, speculating somewhat over whether crystal meth was starting to become more and more popular in Jacksonville, and I don't know if it ever has. Have you seen more meth surface on the streets?
No, actually, I think the good news about crystal meth is the East Coast, particularly Jacksonville. By the time meth worked its way across the country, the horror stories about what meth does to you physically had really gotten out. I mean, people knew, boy, this stuff is really, it kills you physically.
The Skeletor effect.
Oh yeah, it was incredible. And so I think that had some impact on it. And then, fact of the matter is, Jacksonville was so addicted to crack cocaine that crystal meth couldn't catch a toehold, which is a good thing, I guess, in some respects. But drugs are a major problem.
Of our violent crime, what percentage of it would you say is related to the drug trade, in terms of everything from conflicts over a street corner that you're using for sales to...
I tell you, David, if people would go online at jacksheriff.org and look up our 2006 murder study, and one of the statistics that you will see in there is that 55% of our murder victims died in known high drug trafficking areas. So that's a good clue right there that drugs are the nexus for violent crime.
Mm-hmm. I think the mayor had said before too that a large percentage of our homicides happen within an earshot of churches too. Can you explain that?
I haven't heard that.
Okay.
But I had a reporter up from the Orlando Sentinel one time in 2006 when the murders were up, and she asked me, she said, "Sheriff, I've driven around your community and I see almost a church on every corner. Why do you have this murder problem if you have all these churches?" And I said, "Well, that's pretty easy, really, because the devil's going to attack wherever the light is shining the brightest. So I'm not surprised that Jacksonville is under that kind of attack."
That's an interesting point too. Just that contrast, because a lot of people who are visiting Jacksonville always talk about how they're struck by the values of the people.
Mm-hmm.
It's very modest here. It's a very blue collar, hard-working kind of town. But at the same time, you'd have these very dramatic episodes in crime that we're talking about.
And I think, David, like I've told people before, I said, look, and this came out of the 2006 murder study. I said, look, three things. If you're not slinging dope in Jacksonville, you're not dealing dope, you're not hanging around with people that carry guns illegally, and you treat your spouse right, because that's another major category, domestic murder. If you're not doing one of those three things, honestly, your chances of being murdered in Jacksonville are fairly slim.
Have you seen more violent crime kind of spread to other areas of town as the economy started to go bad? Did it seem as if crime started to spread out, or is it still contained in certain quadrants?
No, actually, it's. I think it's fairly. I think it's around those drug dealing areas, and in fact, we've identified those areas. That's what Operation Safe Streets was all about. Was identifying where those violent crime areas are at. And drugs is usually right at the center of it, and we're attacking those particular areas. And there is some displacement. In fact, I've heard Sheriff Beasler down in Clay County lament many times that look, we're squeezing the balloon up here, and they're going to Clay County. Mm-hmm. Well, I'd love to put them all in jail, but if we're running them out of town, that's almost as good.
Yeah.
Not quite, but because I'd really rather put them in jail.
Right.
But we are targeting those very high crime areas. That's what Operation Safe Streets was really all about.
The ones going to Clay County, though, don't you have to chase them there with the Cops Without Borders program?
And that's why we put that together.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had tremendous success with that, working with Clay County, who really, the bad guys don't know where the county line's at, and they don't care about the county line. And that's why it was important that JSO and Clay SO work so very close together. And I'm very proud of that program and what we've been able to do working with Clay County.
Let's get some of these reader questions
Okay.
out of the way. One of the things here is from somebody named Bonnie, and she wants to know, she says we have 12 juvenile justice schools in our county, and why so many? Why is that necessary?
12 juvenile justice schools?
Yeah, that's what she says. I can't be any more specific. Maybe
Juvenile.
I'm not sure what that means. I know there are some alternative, maybe she's talking about alternative schools for violent students or something?
I'll tell you what, I'll ask her, and then maybe she'll respond, but we'll move on to another question. We'll see if she writes back about that. Okay, another one here is somebody actually has a question, actually it's the same person, has an issue with the data not being loaded to the sheriff's website. She says the last reporting date was February of this year, and she just wants to know why is the data not more consistently updated on the site?
It should be updated.
Yeah. She has.
I will check into that.
Okay, good. Very good. And that's one of the things we should talk about.
Which?
A minute ago. Well, she sent a link to DC. Yeah, she sent a link to dc.state.fl.us/.
Oh, that's not us.
That's not you.
That's not us. That's the state.
Okay, let me make sure she.
In fact, if you will tell her to go to jaxsheriff.org, she can click on crime stats and get the latest information for crime within a half-mile radius of her home.
Gotcha. jaxsheriff.org.
Which that's another thing. While he's typing, I would tell your viewers, David, is if you go to our website at jaxsheriff, JAX-sheriff.com, you can get crime stats, you can get crime prevention information. There's a button on there called Offender Watch, where you can type in your address and you can see every sexual predator and offender who lives within a 1 mile radius of you. I would encourage people to go on there because that's all information that they can use to help protect their children or grandchildren. And one thing that's nice about our system over the state system is on ours, if you check it one day, let's say if you're on the state system, you check it one day and the next day a sexual predator moves in next door to you, you're not going to know that. Under our system, you can type in your email address, and if one moves into a 1 mile radius of your house, we'll send you an email alerting you to that, and then you can go to the site and see who he is, where he lives, what he looks like, and get all of that information immediately.
All right. I'm not entirely clear yet on what Bonnie was talking about. I wish we could figure out what schools they are. I'm not sure yet, but there is one here. Somebody asked if there are any plans this year for additional preventative measures, after school programs, anything that you guys will be ramping up this year that maybe you didn't have in the years past?
Well, you'd have to ask the school board about that. I know we're doing all we can with PAL for after school programming. I'm not sure what the school board has in mind. I think there are some Jacksonville Journey after school programs as well.
Okay.
But those aren't run through the sheriff's office.
Okay. Okay. All right. And I still haven't heard any more clarification. So that's it from us anyway.
All right.
Well, that's time anyhow. So it was perfect. But Sheriff, we appreciate you coming in and chatting with us today about the budget of the Sheriff's Department, and good luck as this process unfolds in the city. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We're going to be doing more of these talks, zeroing in on portions of the budget in the future on Jacksonville.com. Thanks also to Jason Pratt and Jonathan Bennett. And I'm David Hunt. Thanks for joining us.